to the other. And with the corporate tax cut from 30 cents to 28 cents, that has given a significant quid pro quo, if you like, to businesses and to the rural sector. So I think the government will stand firm on this, given the amount of political support for the overall package. But it is obviously going to hurt commercial property owners, and some have suggested that the value of their assets will fall between 5 and 6%, depending on how you measure it. One thing it might do is change the way people build buildings to make them last for less than 50 years.
Yes.
Remember, you might see a few more prefab style buildings that are designed to last for 49 years. That's right. And that is a way that people will look at it. And some buildings, you know, realistically aren't going to last that 50 years. And I suspect there'll be some very clever tax accounting that goes on.
I'm sure there will be. And maybe the old freezing works catching fire, as happened the other day. Now, James, last week you took a punt and said the Fonterra payout could hit the $8 mark. Well, the chairman, Sir Henry van der Heyden, is even more optimistic than you, saying it could, and to quote him in his news release yesterday, it could go to well over $8. Do you think it could?
Well, I mean, I guess the payout could go to over $8 is probably the appropriate way to put it. Cause,
I think he did have a could.
I mean, there's a chance, but I wouldn't be counting on it at all. There's still a lot of water to go under the bridge in terms of the next season's payout, and you know, we're still talking 15 months ahead. I mean, the dairy industry has been quite fortunate. We've seen really strong growth out of our main dairy export markets, being China and the Middle East and things like that. But there are a few things that are developing that could be negative for the industry in terms of what's happening in Europe. That could have a major impact on global markets and global trade. We've got US production, which is now starting to expand. So when you get to prices of commodities where they are right now, then it encourages dairy farmers globally to start producing a bit more milk, and that's what we're seeing in the US. So the US only has to start producing a little bit more, and it has a big impact on global markets. So there's a few things going on there, and when you look at oil, the price of oil dropping quite significantly, then that takes a bit of wealth out of some of our other major exporting countries. So, we're taking a little bit more of a cautious view. We're sort of saying that we're cautious about the statement that it's going to get to $8 because the last 2 seasons we've seen big swings of $2. So
and also with the contagion being the buzzword, I mean our all-important markets in Asia are not necessarily immune to that contagion that's spreading out of Europe. So, we could suffer a bit of setback there too, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, China is our #1 dairy export market, and there's potential for a bit of cooling off there. Perhaps not so much. There would be some impacts from what is happening in Europe, but the property sector is sort of going through a real spike, and if we do see a bit of cooling off, then that could have an impact on demand. But we're longer term, we're positive about about commodity prices for dairy.
Well, Bernard, just getting out your crystal ball, what's in store over the next week? Any predictions from you? Any big announcements in the wind?
The key things to watch are what's happening in North Korea and in China, where if there is more tension on the Korean peninsula, that could throw a spanner.
Yeah, that's quite a worry.
In the Chinese works. Keep an eye too on what's happening in Australia with the mining tax. Remember, Australia is our largest export market, and China, of course, being such a big driver for what's happening in Australia. Those Chinese and Australian markets are ones to watch.
It's a whopper of a tax they're talking about there on the mining companies, isn't it? 40%?
40%, and potentially already $100 billion worth of projects have either been put on hold or are now being reviewed. 30,000 jobs in Australia are potentially at risk if this tax goes through, and there's an awful lot of heat there. There's even some suggestion that Australia's sovereign credit rating may come under threat because of this. It could
be the big one for the election, really, couldn't it?
Yes, and there's a risk that Rudd could get kicked out there. So that's key to watch. And in China, where there's some talk that the yuan may be revalued higher against the US dollar, and therefore the New Zealand dollar would be weaker against the yuan. That's encouraging. Other things for farmers to watch, I think, too, over the next month or so are the increased costs they're going to see with the emissions trading scheme and with feed costs. I'm told that as we go into the winter after the drought, even though there's a lot of rain around at the moment, that is causing some real concerns in terms of getting winter feed, and the costs have risen for winter feed quite a lot. So even though though the outlook, particularly for dairy farmers, on the revenues looks good, their costs are under pressure too, and they're going to find it difficult, much more difficult than in the past, to get easy funds from their banks to buy up their neighbours' farms. So there's still some real pressure there on prices and for farmers on profits.
And James, just very briefly, what's on your crystal ball?
Europe continues to be the biggest thing,
That's
and
the biggie, isn't it?
that's going to have a biggest impact probably through the next few months as to whether we see something major come out of, well, more major come out of Europe, because we've already seen some pretty significant risks coming out of there.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. Thanks to my guests, rural economist James Shortall from ASB and business commentator Bernard Hickey from interest.co.nz. Well, we'd love to hear your feedback, so please go to our website and drop us a line and have a look at my weekly blog. You can find that and much more besides at www.country99tv.co.nz. See you next week.